So, with the death of Elizabeth I, the Tudor dynasty ended definitely, and the Stuarts took over with James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. Well, among all the problems of the kingdom, the religious one was the most important. In fact, the so-called British Revolution wasn't only a great political clash, but also a religious war. The Anglican Church was only formally separated from the Catholic one. In fact, it preserved most of its traditional aspects. The main formula of James I, supreme head of the Church, was no bishops, no king. However, lots of people wanted to cancel all the Catholic rites to purify the Church. Therefore, the most radical Calvinists in England took the name of Puritans. The Puritans had a high sense of duty and morality. In fact, they dedicated their life to work and pray, and they raised up their children with a strict discipline.
For them, work was a form of prayer, and praying was a way to thank God. They were strenuous workers, and this had a financial effect. Puritans started to save money, becoming richer and richer, conquering positions in the middle class. The Puritans asserted the basic sinfulness of man, but believed in predestination. Salvation only depended on God's will. Their spiritual life was based on self-discipline and introspection. During the reign of James I, their main target became the bishops of England, identified with the Antichrist. The policy of the Stuarts was comparable to an absolute monarchy, but the main constraint it had to take into account was the Magna Charta Libertatum. James I called himself king by divine right and imposed taxes without the consent of Parliament. Besides, his defense of the Anglican State Church led to the birth of an anti-monarchist coalition, which included both the Puritans and the members of Parliament.
James I's successor was his son, who became king like Charles I in 1625. He followed his father's policy and had to face Puritans directly. At this point, most of the aristocrats openly sided with the king, and the English Civil War officially began on the 23rd of October, 1642. The two factions involved in the battle were the Royalists, led by the king, and the Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, who formed the so-called Ironsides, also called Roundheads by their opponents. In 1645, the king was defeated in Naseby, and the conflict moved inside the Parliament, which was divided into two further factions, the Presbyterians and the Levellers. The former was willing to find an agreement with Charles I, thus accepting the monarchy. The latter adopted a principle of popular sovereignty. The king was taken prisoner in 1647. Cromwell took control of London and expelled or arrested more than 100 members of the House of Lords. The remaining members voted for the execution of the king on the 30th January 1649. After this, the monarchy was abolished and the country was ruled as a republic, known as the Commonwealth.
In 1660, Charles II became King of England after the long revolutionary and republican period, because Englishmen felt oppressed by the strict rules of the Puritans. However, the situation was not yet calm. In fact, the country was still divided into Royalists and Roundheads that became Tories and Whigs. They were both opposed to absolutism. The king was considered by the former superior to Parliament, by the latter inferior. Furthermore, while the Tories were staunch supporters of the Anglican Church, the Whigs were in favor of freedom of worship. Fearing that the monarch would follow the example of Louis XIV in France, the two parties summoned William III of Orange, stadtholder of the United Provinces, husband of Mary Stuart, daughter of James II. In 1688, William landed in England with 12,000 men, forcing James to flee. He was elected legitimate sovereign together with his wife by the Parliament.
After the years of the Glorious Revolution, the new rulers undertook to sign the Bill of Rights, a text that placed substantial limitations on the power of the future rulers. So, a parliamentary nominated constitutional monarchy was born in England.